Thank you, George, for joining us on the We Need to Act podcast. It is a great pleasure to have you with us. And actually, I have your book here. Not. It helped me a lot. I need your signature.
I'll send it to you by email.
Thank you. Well, this book, Don't Even Think About It, has helped me, as I said, on many occasions during my PhD and my work with the organizations and the consultancy work I do. And it remains incredibly timely because our brains still seem to ignore climate change, as we see. Why do our brains find it so difficult to emotionally engage with the climate change, with this specific topic, even when we rationally understand the threat?
Well, let's go back also to what you were just saying. It's what's very interesting is that we still are not engaging with it. When I started working on climate change around the year 2000, so I've been doing this for about 25 years, I worked on forests before. I spoke with a lot of scientists. I said, this is moving very, very slowly. By this point, we were already, more than 10 years into international action. And they said, oh, don't worry. Don't worry. Yes, it's concerning, but of course, the weight of the evidence, the weight of the research is getting stronger and stronger. Um, and actually, with this, there's an issue that climate change is really progressing. So we're going to be seeing increasingly extreme weather. And there's going to be a point in this where the combination of the weight of the evidence that we have, combined with the increasingly extreme weather events, will raise public awareness. And they said the problem at the moment is that it's abstract, it's in the future, people don't understand the science. So once they understand the science, we've got to get that through to them. And then secondly, once it feels really close, it will change attitudes. Now, I never felt that that was a good analysis. That always seemed to me very superficial. And the truth is that it was. That people's concern about climate change is increasing, right? People do engage with it, but much, much slower. And the two parts of that are very important. People thought it was a problem with information, that if we had more information, we understood the science, we would get it, or that the presence of the climate impacts would switch us on. And that's a fundamental misunderstanding of the way that our brains work. So it's a very complex question why we don't engage with it. And when I wrote the book, I had the privilege of speaking with a lot of people who were world leaders in their respective areas of cognitive psychology, of social psychology, of communications, which is the area that I work on. And there was a lot of different answers. But in a nutshell, the issue of climate change is not any single problem, but the fact it is a combination of things that we're bad at. So if there was a single problem, then we could have a magic bullet and we could say, right, let's take that out. So the scientists, of course, say, well, it's just enough information. And that is an issue. People don't understand the issue or what's happening, but that is not enough in itself. The primary issue with climate change for a long time has been this combination of factors that we're bad at. We're bad at things which are in the future. We're much better at things which are here and now. We're bad at things which are remote and distant. We're much better at things which relate directly to us. We're bad at things that involve cost. We respond very well to things that involve benefits. We'll take incredible chances on benefits. People will spend, especially poor people, spend a lot of money on lottery tickets in the hope of winning something, even when the chances are impossible. Right? So if there's a benefit, we really go for it. But if there's a cost, we try and avoid it. And the evasion isn't denying it. It's just saying, I don't want to think about it. So, for example, like many people, I put in my annual tax return about 10 minutes before the deadline when it has to go in. I have left it sitting there as long as I possibly can, not because I have to, but just because I don't want to think about it. I just want to keep pushing it away. And there are other problems as well with climate change, which is that in one sense, it's something we haven't got any experience with. So we have no cultural experience to draw on. So, for example, we do spend money on insurance to avoid future costs, right? So something like insurance, we do deal with quite well. And you'd go, well, isn't that like climate change? Isn't climate change, spending money on climate change, spending a bit of money now in order to avoid the chances of something worse in the future? You go, well, yes, But no, the insurance industry had 200 years to develop on the basis of people watching their houses burn down. This is a situation we've never faced this before. So we will learn this lesson. The problem is we'll only learn it when we're there. So the issue, and I should add into all of this, very, very important factor, but whilst climate change is something that we are not good at dealing with, there are a whole number of people who have a very strong interest in making sure we do not deal with it. And they are playing this game very, very well. So there is an entire industry out there saying climate change, it's not real. Oh, it's in the future. You don't need to worry about it. It's not such a big deal. We can get over it. We can adapt to it. Don't trust the people who are telling you that. They have their own political motivations. Otherwise, they're stirring away. Now, the danger of that is not just that people automatically believe them. Much more of a danger is that people are unsure that this is really an issue. So they're playing with that uncertainty thing. And even now, even though now international levels of concern about climate change are very high, if you ask people, are you concerned about climate change? Still, it is amazing to me that in every country in the world, there are large numbers of people who still think the scientists are unsure about it. This uncertainty has been really, really played with. And of course, we see this acting out on a huge scale in the US, where climate denial has taken control of the national agenda. And that is very much fired by the economic interests. So you have a very unholy alliance here between our own cognitive weakness, but we're not good at dealing with issues of this kind, combined with absolute cognitive certainty of certain vested interests that they're going to make sure that we don't deal with it. And this has been acting out for the last 30 years. And I fear that unless we significantly change the way we think and talk about it, it can keep running. Like, even though now we're getting more and more extreme weather events, the dial is shifting, but not very fast. So it is not true to say that we can't think about climate change or that things aren't changing. We can think about it. We're talking about it now. There's a world community of people who are prepared to go out on the streets, protest, get arrested, demonstrate, very high levels of concern, but it's not enough to carry everybody with us. And the lack of a majority decision on this holds us back and allows the opportunity for vested interests and ideologically driven parties to take control of the politics.
Well, you have highlighted different
There's
topics,
a lot.
interesting, topics. So, actually, well, we talked about the present and the future, and we are wired to think in present situations. And actually, climate change is happening right now, right here, right now. Actually, in Portugal, we had like this past week heavy rain and flooding everywhere, but people still questioning about it and say, oh, this used to happen a lot before, this is normal, and they don't understand that actually it's not normal. And you also mentioned scientists knew this from the 60s. And there were these think tanks, the fossil fuel industries, hiding this truth from the public to their profits. And you are a specialist in climate communication and co-founder of the Climate Outreach and Information Network. And I often talk about this quote by Sir David Attenborough because I think it says a lot, that saving our planet is now a matter of communication because we have the science. We just need the will to communicate and people to understand what is happening and that it is an immediate thing. Do you agree? And what kind of communication are we still missing to link people to what is happening?
Well, let's go back a step and say why the communication is important.
Okay.
The way we make sense of the world around us is from the information we receive from our social group. So there are different kinds of truth. There's a scientific truth, and scientists are wary of the word truth, of course, but there's a body of scientific evidence that says that this is what the evidence suggests. And there is social truth. Social truth is what we hear from our friends, our family, from wider society, from the media, from social media, and so on. And in the case of climate change, there's a conflict between them. So most people, in fact, the vast majority of people, do not have an understanding of the science or the principles behind it. Their opinions on climate change are shaped by what they're receiving from that wider social truth. That is why that is actually the battleground. That is the place where the conversation has to take place. It's not just a matter of producing another big report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and saying, look, look how fat this is. It's about the truth that people receive within their social peer networks. We're living also in a world where there is high levels of distrust of most authority figures. Now, it's different for different countries, but in most countries, there's increasing distrust in government, in the media, in advocacy organizations such as environmental organizations, and to some degree, not much less so, but to some degree in scientists. And so what people are trusting is what they hear from people around them. And that's why communications is so essential, is that it's what people are hearing within their social networks which determines their sense of reality and what is important. And we know from 50 years or more of experimental research that people will believe practically anything if they're in a social group where people are telling them that. We know that from history. We know that if people say it's the witch which is changing the climate, this, by the way, is what we saw in the 17th century when the climate in Europe went through a cycle of extreme cooling. People said it's the witches, and they started a massive campaign of burning
Yeah,
witches
yes.
because that's what they were hearing from each other. That's what their ideology was telling them. Similarly, if the people around you are saying, hey, it's not such a big deal, the weather's always been like this in Portugal, that's what you start to believe, even when a bit of you is going, no, hang on, this isn't right. You
Uh-huh.
go with the flow of what the people around you are saying. So the communications is essential. But I want to say it's communications between people and it's communications within groups that you trust. It is not about running an advertising campaign. In fact, I think there's good reason to say that if, certainly in my country, in Britain, if the government ran um, a high profile television campaign on climate change, I think it probably cause more harm than good because at the moment, trust in government is very low. It's communications which are about people hearing about it within the groups and networks that they trust. And I should say it's kind of interesting, by the way, to add to that point, David Attenborough came to this issue quite late. Although he's an international leader on climate, and I greatly admire his work on that, for a decade, people were saying, David, this is a really huge issue. You need to take this on board. And he was reluctant to take it on board. He only started really coming in, like 10, 15 years into the issue. So even somebody as well informed and intelligent as David Attenborough takes time to move on to issues. It's not by any means straightforward. And in the end, what persuaded him was communications that spoke to him in his values from people he trusted. He's just the same as anyone. He's just the same as a coal miner in Colombia, for example. He's just anybody. You need to hear it from somebody who's
Uh-huh.
like you and you trust.
That's true. And the other day, I was reading an article about that. So this communication you were talking about. It is a communication at the community level, but it is so hard right now because people with this digital age and everyone on their mobile phones online. Actually, we have been less engaging in the community and more in tune with the communication that we receive from different sources online. What do you think
What
about
yes,
that?
no. I mean, I mean, it's challenging at the
Uh-huh.
moment, but the fact that people are within networks online with which they share values and identities is itself an incredibly powerful thing. I mean, that's what has enabled the massive increase in climate change activism, especially over the last 10, 15 years. Before the internet really took off, I was trying to organize public campaigning on climate change. It was really, really hard. It's really hard to reach people. Now reaching people is possible. But the danger of the online communities is we're seeing increasing fragmentation and polarization. So we're seeing there's real danger. But the people who care very much about climate change are getting very worked up about it. But the people who are in a more kind of denial group or whatever, or they're avoiding the issue, are not hearing about it or being fed contrary material. And you're right, it's a challenge how you reach into those groups. But I think that's the only answer. I think that is absolutely essential, and it's not by any means impossible. A lot of my work over the last 20 years has been doing exactly that. And look, there's no, like I said, there's no magic bullet. There's no single thing you go for. It's going to be a whole lot of things. There needs to be a fundamental public education about climate change, what it is, what's causing it. People need to understand it. So there needs to be a level there. There's a vital role for government in this. There's absolutely a role for scientists to explain what is happening in straightforward, clear ways, a role for the media, and especially the missing part, I think there's a role for speaking at a peer-to-peer community level, especially in the parts of the society who are outside the area of normal climate change communications. So what my work and my passion particularly for the last 20 years has been this issue of how can we find ways of speaking to people who are maybe outside the communications, maybe they have more conservative or more traditional politics, because all of the research shows that those are people who are more skeptical of climate change for a whole lot of reasons. Maybe they're people like, for example, I mentioned a Colombian coal miner, like somebody whose whole livelihood and community is invested in fossil fuels. They have very strong reasons for not wanting to change. Of course, it's their livelihood, right? It's their whole society. Um, and I have huge sympathy with that. I think environmentalists have been very abusive towards people who work in the fossil fuel industry. I mean, senior management, fine. But there are people who have genuine livelihoods and genuine needs on this. And what we need to do is we need to be finding ways of involving them in the conversation, making sure that they're talking about it amongst themselves in a way which is constructive. I think there needs to be. I think what is missing is commitment to starting a national, global conversation about climate change, which gets people involved. And behind that, there's a lack of the necessary investment to make that happen. You've got a situation where fossil fuel industry in particular, but that's part of a much wider network of interests, are putting a lot of effort into this and a lot of money, whilst lobbying, but also just in general communications, like all over the place. I continue to see advertisements telling me that everything is okay, or articles placed in newspapers, or controlling the media in various ways. We need to have something comparable, which is saying to people, actually, this is serious. And the thing I always say is not just that it's serious, but that we're all in this together. Everybody has something to contribute. This is especially breaking this toxic identity politics that says that climate change is only something of concern to people who are a certain kind of person. We need to be open to and inviting everyone to be a part of this. Otherwise, they will find their social truth somewhere else, which is exactly what has happened over the last 20, 30 years.
That's true. And you mentioned two really important things, which are education and open dialogue.
Yeah.
Open and inclusive dialogue. And it's what we are trying to do with the We Need to Act podcast. And
Yeah.
it reminded me something that Gus Peth said. Do you know him? He was the founder of the World Resource Center.
Yeah.
And he said like a while ago about this is not about science anymore. This is about a shift in mindset. And I think we can only do that through education. And there's something really important also. And the other day I was searching on LinkedIn and I saw someone from my network. She's pursuing a master's in neuroscience because, in her words, we can't regenerate the planet without understanding the human brain.
Yeah.
And to shift mindset, we also neuroscience and social psychology, as you said, you mentioned earlier about the social setting and how it influences our beliefs and also attitudes and behaviors. What role do they play in shaping how people perceive and respond to climate change?
Well, let's go back to that quote you started with of saying it's no longer about the science. It's very much about the science. It's very much.
I didn't quote it too well.
Not your quote, I understand. But there isn't a division between science and communications.
Yeah, true.
or any of this. This is entirely about the science,
Uh-huh.
as your colleague on LinkedIn says. This is about the science of how we are motivated
Uh-huh.
to make major changes.
Mhm.
What motivates us to say, I need to pay attention to
Mhm.
this issue. This is important. And I haven't used the word attention so far, but a lot of the issues of why we find climate change hard are issues of the boundaries of attention. We
Uh-huh.
make decisions all the time about what to pay attention to and what not. And I guess this is the most important aspect of the cognitive psychology of this. We
Mhm.
draw kind of, oh, look, I'm doing a little heart. We do boundaries
Uh-huh.
around the things we pay attention to because we go crazy otherwise.
Otherwise, it's true.
Yeah. We go absolutely crazy. I mean, and the brain, and as indeed all animals, is
Uh-huh.
extremely alert, not just to paying attention to things, but ignoring things. Yeah. And this gets even more pronounced in the world of the information technology, where the sheer quantity of material coming at us is so high. So we are constantly going yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. Like on dating app, like we're flipping yes, no. The challenge and the cognitive psychology challenge is how do we boost this issue to a point where it becomes attended, where people pay attention to it, and that I think lies very much with giving it the triggers that make us say we need to do something about this. Now, activists like to think that the trigger is calling the alarm bell, right? Of saying, okay,
Yeah.
people pay attention to this. If we
Apocalyptic scenarios.
scream, yeah, if we scream disaster crisis,
Uh-huh.
this is true to a degree. I mean, like I said, this is never a single thing. It's a complex map, but this is true to a degree. But really, the things we pay attention to, going back to my point, are the things which our social group pays attention to.
Mhm.
Whether it's whether it's lifestyle issues, which by the way are really important. Like we're really
Mhm.
going to have to think about the way that we live. Whether it's politics, um, you know,
Mhm.
whether it's what we should talk about. Because before you even have a public communication, there's a whole
Mhm.
process that decides whether or not we can have a conversation. One of the things I found most enlightening when I started doing this work was the research that had been done in areas with serious human rights abuses. And of course, that's very relevant to many countries in South America too, where people decide that there are things they don't want to know about. And they create a social boundary to say, we're not going to talk about this. And I think climate change for many groups falls into that category. They go, and for a long time, it's a bit better now, but for a long time in my country, in Britain, if you try to have a conversation about climate change, it would just immediately stop and people just change the subject. There was some kind of agreed social contract that this was not something that people wanted to talk about. So part of the challenge and the cognitive challenge is making sure that it's something people do want to talk about. And again, it goes back, I think, to that issue of social cues. People are talking about it, they're aware about it, they're thinking about it, they're hearing about it from people who they trust around them, and they're feeling that they have some sense of agency. There's something that they can do. That's the missing part of the picture. So the danger we have at the moment is a lot of people go, oh my God, it's a huge problem, but there's nothing I can do about it. It's essential that people feel that they are participants in this. And again, unfortunately, we have a political economic system which is very much about taking power away from people. So we cannot separate moving forward on climate change and this wider issue of communications from a sense of agency, that people feel that they are part of the process, that they have something to contribute. I go back to that word contribute. Everybody has something to contribute on this, that we're all in this together, that we respect the diversity of opinion and views in society. We don't have to agree, but we do at least need to be talking about it.
That's so true. There's no hope without action.
Yeah.
Well, you need to be engaged and doing something, feeling that you have something to contribute. Otherwise, it will feel like it is daunting. It is overwhelming, and you start feeling ego anxiety because you
That's
can't
right. Well,
do
the danger
much.
we have with climate change is that we could go very quickly
Hmm.
And I think we're in this transition zone now where we go very quickly from a period when people just went, "Oh, you know what? That's far off in the future." I mean, that's what I
Uh-huh.
always heard from people in focus groups. You'd say, "What do you think about climate change?" You'd say, "Oh god, that's a terrible problem for future generations."
Yeah, that's it.
They're pushing it as far away as they can to a situation, and this has been a big change where people say, "Okay, this is happening, it's happening now, but there's nothing I can do about it." Combined with
Uh,
people going, "Oh, for God's sake, don't talk about that. Oh, that's so depressing."
that's yeah, that's
Yeah.
true.
And so it's this again, it's this so there's a situation where there's this very narrow window, I think, between people accepting that there's an issue and that there's something happening and
Mhm,
feeling there's something they can do about it before they rapidly move into a sense of disempowerment. And let's remember, there's some very powerful economic actors who are working on this process
mhm,
to make sure that people do not feel a sense of agency, of capacity around it. So that's one reason why I think, for example, social movements are
mhm.
are very important. They're not for everybody. In fact, they might only be for a
Uh-huh.
small minority of people. But having people saying, "Hell yeah, this is important to me and I care," especially younger
Mhm.
people, is so important for making it present. Psychologists use the word salient. Saliency is that it's something you pay attention to. Things which are cognitively salient are things which you pay attention to. And that's the ballpark that climate change has to be in.
Yeah, and if younger generations are engaged and involved in these social movements, they can somehow impact or influence their parents, the family.
Yeah,
And,
but again, it's everybody is in this
um,
spectrum. But
yeah.
yeah, I think that young people have permission in society to speak out
Mhm,
in a way that they don't kind of necessarily realize. That a lot of older people, like myself, respect young people for having a
mhm.
clarity and a commitment and an optimism and an energy that older people lose. And I think that that's why I was very excited by the growth of youth movements on climate
Mhm.
change. These things come in cycles, so things go down, but it will all
Yeah,
pick up again. But that has to be combined with a wider sense that everybody is involved in this. Everybody has something to contribute. And
yeah.
mm, yeah,
We saw it going down, you said the cycles in 2010 and then up again. And now we see slowing down again. But I
yeah.
also feel like, and there has been also a crisis of apathy and fatigue fueled by this polarization and disinformation you mentioned
Mm,
before in our conversation. And also the other day, I was looking to Amazon searching for climate change books,
oh,
and
yeah,
there are a lot of denial books
a lot.
there.
Yeah.
And I was really frustrated, like, whoa, this is increasing
Mm.
and it's out there. Can communication help re-engage people emotionally and rebuild trust without deepening divisions? Like, say, this is the other day, someone was saying we shouldn't be talking about left wing, right wing. We should be talking about top down also what is happening but there is a lot of division. How can communication bring us together, as you said, and be more inclusive even with people that don't actually believe or denial climate change?
Well, I think we work at lots of different levels. I think first of all, it requires a commitment from all of the people who are concerned on climate change to recognize that engagement needs to be key to what they do. And engagement is not the same as communications. Again, I want to be clear. We're using the word communications as a shorthand, but if you go to a government, and I've done a lot of work with governments, and you say we need communications, they say, right, let's have an advertising campaign, let's start a website. I go, no, 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 no. Engagement is a two-way process. So there needs to be a way that people feel that they can speak, that they can be listened to. Yeah. Um, so we need to have that commitment. And the Conference of Parties, which is meeting now in LM, meets every year, has an entire sub-process concerned with communications and engagement and citizens. And every country in the world, when they met originally in Rio in '92, in the original convention, committed Article 6 of a convention. Anyone could look at it online. It says very clearly, we will inform and educate our citizens and enable them to participate in climate policy. Then when they did the Paris Agreement, that was repeated almost word for word. Plus, incidentally, the commitment of the more developed countries to fund less developed countries to enable that process in their own countries. They have pathetically failed on this. Pathetically. I mean, they try, and there's some people within the UN process who are trying to push this ahead, but the degree to which this becomes marginalized is atrocious. And there is no government, in my view, which is doing this adequately and funding it and supporting it. You know, my own country here in Britain, we spent £100 million. That's like $130 million on communication during COVID. And we realized you can't expect people to make major changes in their lives and to be committed to a very difficult process unless you're reaching them, unless you're putting something into it. My country currently has no dedicated budget for communicating climate change. It's all scattered around a little bit here, a little bit there. You know, there's no strategy. So I think we have to do that. Then the next thing to say on that is I think we need to recognize, going back to your point, how do we reach people? But it happens at lots of different levels. So there needs to be a national level conversation, that a national, international level conversation that says we're all humans, we're all in this together, we're all facing a similar global problem. That's an international level. At a national level, we're all in this together. But something also which is validating to say, in our country, we're proud of who we are. We respect who we are. In any country, it's always the same thing. It's a different story. Countries tell themselves different stories, but there is a sense of national identity that people have, something that makes them proud of who they are. That's a conversation that can reach across society. Then within that, we have different cultural groups. And within each of those, there needs to be a conversation which is based on who they are. So we don't have to think people on the left and people on the right, we have just one conversation. I don't agree with that at all. We have one that combines it, which says we're all in this together. We need to respect and work together. Everybody has something to contribute. But conservatives have a different kind of conversation because their values, their identity and motivations are different from people on the left. Yeah. People, for example, who are, we said before, like coal miners, they have a very different conversation about how they are going to secure benefit for themselves and their families as we move into decarbonization, but we have a just transition which respects and recognizes them. But they need to be part of that conversation. I've done a lot of work. I've done work with oil workers. I've done work also, quite a lot of work with people of faith. People of faith have a very different conversation, which is all about how climate change and taking action is grounded in faith values, about their commitment to God's creation, for example, or again, you would have a very different conversation, for example, with Hindus, where it's about a wider sense of connection with the natural environment. Every faith group has its own conversation, which happens internally. My Muslim friends, for example, talk about climate change as a jihad, as a kind of a test of their faith. Then within that, obviously, you have a different conversation, but evangelicals might see it differently from Catholics and so on. So within each group, you're encouraging that group to have a conversation with themselves in terms of their own values. And similarly for all of the different groups. Now, each of these groups have different networks, different ways of reaching
Mhm.
them. And you're saying, we said before, it's hard. It's not that hard. I would love every Catholic church in the world, for example, to commit to a day when they would all do a sermon on climate change on a particular Sunday.
That
Basic
would be
Catholic
awesome.
values. How great would that be? Goodness me, that
Yeah,
would reach 1 billion people.
it
Um,
will. Yeah, it will have a huge impact, sure.
yeah. Why not? Why is that not happening? And the reason is because there's neither the funding nor the commitment or the drive to make it happen. Yeah, and the thing I keep coming back to is that the conversation needs to be based around, yes, the science, around what we need to do, but very much around the values and the identity of the people who are involved in that conversation, which is going to be very different for different groups. It starts by the validation. I think a lot of people, when I speak to people who are skeptical, particularly the most skeptical group, and we can we can pin that down very clearly, of saying that it is older, white, working class, conservative men. The group is a combination of all of the things which actually make people skeptical about climate change for a whole lot of reasons. that group has to start with a validation of saying, you are worthwhile, you're important, you have something very important to contribute to this. And my work with oil workers, for example, shows that if you go in with a conversation saying climate change is burning up the world and you're to blame, of course they say, go away,
Yeah.
go to hell, we're not talking to you. If you have a conversation that starts by saying, and we tested this very widely in Canada, actually, of oil workers,
Uh-huh.
but you have a conversation that says, thank you. Thank you for your work. Thank you for the contribution you make to our society. Thank you for for your really dirty, dangerous work. I mean, I have a friend who owned a past and he spent 6 months in intensive care working on an oil rig. This is
Oh,
dangerous work. Thank
okay.
you for that. We have a problem and you need to be part of that conversation and getting out of it. Not denying it. This isn't going to be easy. This is challenging, but you have a lot to offer to this. Um, so I think successful conversations have to be about respecting people, about validating who they are, about giving them a sense that they are important, that they have something to contribute. And the big danger we have with climate change and the polarization is that the groups that hold the issue on climate change, particularly myself, my friends in the environmental movement, are very quick to blame. And and we wonder why we have polarization. Yeah, because we're feeling it and we're playing directly into the hands of the people who want to stop climate action.
So we have to connect with people emotionally because we have different perceptions of what is climate change and what is sustainability in general. And
I
you
think over
mentioned,
the next I think over the currently at the moment, and I think over the next 25 years, the big battle is gonna be about identity.
uh-huh,
People have to feel that recognizing and taking action on climate change is part of who they are. It's about their identity, and that's the battleground, and that the people who do not want action are going to be saying, "No, who you are is like this. It's somebody who doesn't believe this." Or more the point, who you are is somebody who you do believe in it, but you don't think it's that big a deal, and you're just gonna but you are so important that somebody else needs to do it. We hear this a lot. It's like I'm not doing it until they do it. Um, which this kind of passing the buck has been going on now for 30 years. So the reason people do things in the end
uh-huh,
is because it's an expression of who they are. You know, the reason that vegetarians or vegans eat what they are is not because they really, in the end, think that that one less steak is going to change the world. It's
uh-huh,
because they personally do not want to contribute to the beef economy. They don't want to do it. It's who they are, and that's what religions do. And people will defend that to
uh-huh,
the very last. And I think the reason we'll take action on climate change or want to do anything at all is because we just think, no, this is who I am. This is what's important to
uh-huh.
me and my group. This is what makes us who we are. We are the kind of people who care about this. That's where we need to get to.
You mentioned religion, and I was remembering the book of the scientist Catherine Hayhoe,
Yes.
Saving Us. She talks about their experience, and because she's a religious person, and she has that perspective. And when circling back to the mistrust we have on governments, and you also mentioned that we need a national campaign
Hmm.
to educate citizens and to engage them and foster climate communication. Christiana Figueres,
Mhm.
one of the architects of the Paris Agreement, recently said that the climate action that matters is in the global south, because we see that global north is not doing much. And there are a lot of setbacks, including in the European Union. Do you agree? And again, how can communication help build a more just and inclusive of global climate movement? You mentioned already a lot of things. And do you have anything to add to this question?
I would like to know more about the context within which Christiana was saying that, because there's different levels of action.
Uh
Because
huh.
as I'm sure she would agree, the place where the action needs to happen is in the rich world because we're pumping this stuff out into the air that's causing this problem.
That's true. That's
So
true.
so there's different levels of conversation. Um, and I think we need to be very clear about where the lines of responsibility lie. That those of us in the rich world have absolutely the dominant responsibility for this, and we mustn't be allowed to get away from that.
Not
But I
at all. No.
but I
It's
think
really.
what I would say is there's different levels of conversation, or there's different levels of communication and engagement. In our country, in our countries, we do need to be recognizing we have an overwhelming responsibility to take action on this for ourselves as much as anything. I think in the global south, where we need to have a really much better conversation is to prepare people for climate change. Um, we know for any natural disaster that preparation for impacts makes a huge difference to how bad they are. We're seeing this all the time. We just had a horrible situations of damage in the Philippines where it turned out that most of the money that was meant to be spent on adaptation had disappeared in corruption. So we have to be having a conversation around the world, but I think especially in the global south, about recognizing what is coming and preparing for it. Now, we need to have that in the rich world as well. I think people have no understanding about how serious this is going to get over the next 20, 30 years, except the people who work on it. Like when I talk to climate scientists, they're actually really worried and really frustrated that people don't seem to grasp this. So I think we need to be clear that there's a conversation about reducing greenhouse gas emissions and all of the changes necessary for that. But there also needs to be a conversation about what we are now committed to, but we cannot avoid. We have Antonio Guterres just said that we've gone through 1.5. I felt that was the case since they announced it. I thought 1.5 would be very hard to achieve. We're not going to achieve 1.5. I'm afraid I don't think we're going to achieve 2 either. We have to be prepared for what is coming down the line. But I think that is part of the conversation. I think there's a lot of people who, whatever their views on climate change, the causes of it, recognize that something serious is happening. And I think it's a way of opening up the conversation. Like we're saying, how do you have a conversation, for example, between, um, let's take a really challenging group, Republican evangelical farmers, right? The absolute core of Trump supporters. Well, obviously, the place where you have a conversation there is about how climate change is going to affect their crops, or how we're going to have increased droughts, or how they might have to change their crops, or all of the preparation that they need for it. That is a place where you can start to have a conversation about how climate change is real. And as soon as you're having that conversation, then you can start to say, okay, well, what do we do about it? But if people are not recognizing that and not preparing for that, then we're way behind. Anyway, to go back to the point about the global south, yes, absolutely. And to repeat what I've said, there has been an abject failure. I'm horrified with the thought that the impacts of climate change are going to be enormously magnified because of a lack of preparation and adaptation around the world. Um, I remember I did some work a while back in Tunisia. In Tunisia, people are planting olive groves and olive trees in areas of southern Tunisia that all of the climate impacts show will never be able to sustain olive trees. So people are continuing to invest their livelihoods, and these are poor people, investing in things that do not stand a chance of surviving because they have no basic level information about what is coming down the line. And this mistake is being made everywhere around the world. People are investing their lives and livelihoods in buildings which are going to burn down, or in places that are going to flood. And I think at an economic level, more worrying, that trillions of dollars are being invested in, for example, property development, or in areas that will not be able to sustain the value of that property. So we're going to see some massive economic crunch because of this short-termism. Yeah, we have to have that conversation. And as I repeat, Paris Agreement, as I recall, Article 11 is a commitment from the rich world to provide resources for supporting information and awareness in the global south. That should be a global fund, and currently there's nothing.
That's true. We have failed and continue to fail. That's why the global south is stepping in. Some governments and leaders, as I said before, Petro, Lula,
Yeah, yeah.
perhaps even there are some controversy around, but they are doing and they are raising their voices. That's
Yeah.
and as you said, we are really failing in adaptation, and vulnerable communities will be impacted and are being impacted more because of that. We focus too much on mitigation, but adaptation and creating resilience is not on the agenda.
But there is looking ahead,
Hmm.
and this is a large part of my current research. There is a danger in adaptation as well. If we're talking about the cognitive psychology,
Hmm.
humans are very, very good at adapting. That's our
Okay.
superpower. We're kind of smart in terms of anticipating things in the future. I mean,
Uh-huh.
we're pretty amazing, right? But what we're really, really good at is adapting to things. And so my concern is we go into an adaptive response where
Mhm.
actually we abandon the mitigation altogether and we just say, well, we're just going to adapt to this. And that's deadly because, of course,
Yes.
then if you don't deal with the underlying problem, it's just going to get worse and worse until we have something truly catastrophic.
Mhm.
So, so that is the noise that's starting to come. It's been there for quite a long time, but it's starting to come from the climate deniers, or shall we say the
Mhm.
people who actively oppose climate action, is, eh, yeah, climate change is a problem, but we can adapt to that. And that the best economic policy is we keep burning fossil fuels, we keep digging them up, and we take the
Indeed.
revenue from that
To
in
that.
order to fund climate change action. Um, I was horrified that
Yeah.
President Lula in Brazil, for example, was justifying the opening up of new oil fields and new oil licenses in the Amazon region on the basis of saying, yeah, but we need that funding in order to support our transition to a
It's a
low
controversy.
carbon.
That was the controversy I was talking about.
Appalling. That's absolutely appalling. But that logic, incidentally, is being applied all around the world. And I don't want to necessarily like pick out Brazil, which is a lower income country, which is really which has a lot of needs.
Yeah.
Norway, and indeed my
Yeah.
own country, Britain, but let's pick out Norway in particular, is
Yeah.
expanding oil operations in the Bering Sea on the basis of being able to say that, hey, we do lots of good stuff, and we have more electric cars than anywhere in the world.
Uh-huh.
It's kind of transference which
Yes.
goes on, saying, we will, that's fine. We'll just make some money from that, and then we'll put into this thing over there. So as with everything, we need to be careful in the communications of keeping a balance. I should say also, by the way, we've talked about it as if it's all about communicating climate change, but there's a lot of other things we can communicate. We don't just have to talk about climate change. Like when I worked in India, it was
Uh-huh.
clear that what we need to talk about in India is air quality over
Mhm.
and above everything. I mean, the
Mhm.
air in Delhi is absolutely toxic. It's the most poisonous city in the world. Clearly, what we talk about there is the decarbonization of Delhi.
Mhm.
We don't need to talk about climate change. And I think similarly around a lot of the world, you can have conversations about health, about air quality, about water quality, about standard of life, which doesn't need to use the climate change framing, but can just be saying, look, we need to do these things because they're really worth doing. Oh, and by
Being
the way,
less abstract and
yeah,
more concrete
yeah,
with
because
this.
otherwise people say, well, I'm not going to do this for some abstract thing far in the future where I don't even know what's
Yeah.
going to happen. You say, no, you can do it now because you get results now, which are better for you. So a
Yeah.
positive vision on that.
Because as you said in your book, climate change is a very abstract concept.
Yeah,
It's difficult to imagine all the greenhouse gas emissions up
totally.
there. It's trapped.
It has to be relevant to people, speaking to who they are, their identity, their values, their concerns, whatever those are, in a way that makes them feel good about who they are. That final part is essential. It has to be something where people think, yes, this is me. I'm proud to be a part of this. I'm proud to be Colombian, or I'm proud to be British. This is what we do. We all come together. We've got a challenge, and I've got something to contribute. That's the objective.
Okay, so although the agenda is global, we need to act local. This is to be needs to be some localization, a
Yeah,
global
it's
thing adapted
good.
to a more local conversation connected to the people's essential
Yes.
need.
What I would say is
Yeah,
I'd say it's not so much acting globally, thinking locally. I think it's more about about talking locally,
token locally. Okay.
talking, communicating, and engaging locally on issues which are larger issues concerning all of us. Yeah.
This has been a really interesting conversation. Thank you for joining us. And finally, if you could leave one message to our listeners, one insight about how to think and act differently in the face of climate crisis, or how to communicate better,
Yeah.
perhaps, what would it be?
There's always so many,
Mhm.
but the big one I always say is talk about it, and talk about it with people who would not normally be talking about climate change.
Mhm.
Um, the you know, there always used to be, like, less so now, like 10 easy things you can do on climate change. I always hated these lists.
But they are helpful.
Ah,
It's
well, we
science.
all need to do stuff. There's no question, right? The reason I hated them was because they don't work. You know,
Okay.
there's lots of evidence, but actually they don't seem to make any difference. But
Uh-huh.
people don't do them, or they just do the easy ones, or recycling your paper, but they still keep flying. Or
Yeah.
the the thing which is missing off the list is talking about it,
Mhm.
and talking about it begins by recognizing that there is universally a silence about this. And that silence is what I was saying before. It's a boundary created around it where we say we're not talking about this thing. We're going to push it out. And I think it's about saying, no, damn it, I'm going to talk about it. This is important. This is important for us, who we are, and I care about this, and this is important. And the
Mhm.
hardest place to have that is with the people who immediately try and stop the conversation. And in my work, of course, I try and enable that, and try and help people to do that. Um, but I think in our own lives we can do it. I talk with people all the time about climate change, partly because
Mhm.
I'm very interested. It's like social research. I'm very interested in what they think. But I also, every now and then, I encounter somebody who is exactly the people I want to speak to. So, like, occasionally, for example, I'm in the US and I
Mhm.
meet somebody who's a really strong Trump supporter. I go, "This is great. We're going to talk about this."
Mhm.
Um, And I think similarly, especially with the people around you, your family, your friends. And most families are very good places to start, because a lot of families are very politically diverse. You've got typically, you might get together, once a year, you might celebrate something, and you've got somebody in your family who's like really conservative or really strong supporter of climate denial. You've got to have that conversation in a way which is, it goes back to principles, a way which is respectful and validating, that says, I like you in so many ways. This is really important. By the way, if anybody's interested, there's a little video I did some years ago on YouTube called "How to Talk to a Climate Denier," which is exactly on this topic. But there's a lot of other materials on it
Okay,
too.
we will link it to our
Yeah.
conversation. So thank you. It was really interesting. And hope to have you, to welcome you again in a future episode
Yeah,
so we can continue because there's a lot of things to discuss. And when we talk about communication, I always feel that there's a lot more to talk, to discuss, to communicate. And even organizations, when they do I specifically work with the organization doing their sustainability journeys and how to engage with their different stakeholders throughout the journey. And I always say to them that the communication is not a add-on. It's not something that you do at the final. You just need to
no,
start doing since the beginning so you can reduce risks during this journey and you can engage everyone because we are all in this together. But they always see communication as something
and
just at the end of the road. We will do that. When we have the report, we will communicate. No, this is not like this. And it's really hard
that's right.
to.
It's exactly the same conversation I have with governments on this.
Mhm,
Is that I say that they think communications is about communicating their policy. And I go, no, no, it's about creating the social contract that
mhm,
supports your policies, and that actually that communications needed to start 30 years ago. We're against time on this, but you can still start at any point. But if people think, if your communications go out and say climate change is a huge problem, that's why we need the carbon tax, not
mhm,
surprisingly, it blows up in your face. You have to be laying the foundations for people to understand that there is a collective problem before you can bring in the policy. And it's been an enormous mistake on the parts of all of these governments who
mhm,
sign up at these conferences for net zero, but they put no effort or energy into communicating what is net zero. Most people got no idea of what it is. What does it mean? It's a stupid phrase anyway. It's very
Yeah.
bad connotations. What does it mean? And so the situation we have in many countries, including my own here in Britain, is that people are going, oh, well, we wanted action on climate change, but we don't like this. Well,
Uh-huh.
you never knew what it was. No one ever respected you enough to tell you what it was. And then not
Uh-huh. That's
surprisingly, you
true.
don't like it when it comes. So yeah, I think
Well,
you know,
that's
key.
part of the conversation when we discuss sustainability in general. We are talking about complex ecosystems, the interconnectedness of everything, and then there is something that we are adding up, which is the we are complicating a complex topic,
Well, we
adding
think,
different
yeah, well,
concepts and ideas, and net zero, as you said, neutral, carbon neutrality.
well, the whole story is being written by people who are completely part of that story and don't understand what's going on, you know,
Mhm,
or how ordinary people are. When we said that communications isn't an add-on,
mhm,
communicators or people who understood the psychology of engagement should have been a part of the international climate change process from the very beginning, and they're never present in the room. The people in the room are policymakers who speak their policy language, and
mhm.
they bring in some scientists to give them some advice. They never think about actually, because they're already there, so they just think, oh, well, everybody else can come and follow us here. We get it. And they never actually realize that it's hard and it's challenging for people. But also, people don't need to understand everything. They don't need to understand very much at all. They can just understand one part of it to start.
Thank you so much.
Very nice talking to you.